They say the moment you discover betrayal, your world shatters. But my mind was painfully clear when my phone screen illuminated with a sweet anniversary text from my husband, right as I watched the two of them kissing passionately across the room. I almost collapsed right there in the most luxurious restaurant in Denver. Instead, a cold whisper from a complete stranger standing directly behind me permanently altered the trajectory of my entire life. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The crystal chandelier hanging directly above my head cast a fractured and golden glow across the pristine white linen tablecloth. I sat entirely alone at a secluded corner booth inside the Obsidian Room, which was widely known as the most exclusive and expensive dining establishment in downtown Denver. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of our 5th wedding anniversary. I had spent nearly 3 hours preparing for this evening, carefully selecting a deep emerald silk dress that my husband Julian had always admired. The atmosphere of the restaurant was deliberately designed to exude quiet wealth. The soft murmur of hushed conversations floated through the air, blending seamlessly with the gentle jazz melody playing from hidden speakers. Waiters in impeccable black suits glided silently across the dark mahogany floors, carrying silver trays laden with roasted duck and bottles of vintage wine. Yet, despite the luxurious surroundings, an undeniable knot of anxiety was beginning to tighten in my stomach. I had been sitting at this table for exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes. My half-empty glass of sparkling water had long since lost its chill. I tried to maintain a composed expression, offering polite smiles to the waitstaff who occasionally checked on me with eyes full of quiet pity. Just as I raised my hand to signal the waiter for another glass of water, my phone vibrated intensely against the polished wood of the table. The screen lit up, cutting through the dim lighting of the booth. It was a message from Julian. I quickly unlocked the device, my heart fluttering with a mix of relief and lingering annoyance. The message read, "Happy anniversary, my beautiful wife. I am so incredibly sorry, but I am completely trapped in the main boardroom at Aeroforge Systems. The new propulsion engine project has encountered a critical error, and the entire team is working late to fix it. I cannot leave the building. Please order whatever you want and take a cab home. I will make this up to you tomorrow. I promise." I let out a long, trembling breath. Disappointment washed over me in a heavy wave, but I forced myself to swallow it down. Julian was a senior engineer at Aeroforge Systems, a leading aerospace technology corporation. His career was highly demanding, and I had spent the last 5 years trying to be the supportive, understanding wife. I told myself that his ambition was for our future. I typed out a quick reply telling him not to worry and placed the phone face down on the table, resigned to eating alone. I picked up the leather-bound menu. However, a sudden burst of laughter from the elevated VIP lounge caught my attention. The VIP section was located on a slightly raised platform across the room, separated by a delicate screen of frosted glass and decorative indoor plants. I glanced up casually, intending to look away just as quickly, but my eyes locked onto a familiar silhouette, and the air was violently knocked out of my lungs. There, sitting at a dimly lit table barely 50 feet away from me, was Julian. He was not wearing his stiff corporate suit, and he was certainly not trapped in a boardroom surrounded by engine schematics. He was leaning casually across the small, intimate table. My mind desperately tried to reject the image before me. I told myself it was a stranger who merely resembled him, but then he turned his head, and the ambient light caught the distinct silver casing of the custom watch I had gifted him for his 30th birthday. It was undoubtedly my husband. The horror deepened as I shifted my gaze to the person sitting opposite him. It was a woman with striking features and sharp, dark hair. Even in the shadowy lighting of the restaurant, I recognized her instantly. It was Eleanor Vance. She was the chief executive officer of Vance Innovations, the fiercest and most aggressive rival corporation to Aeroforge Systems. My confusion morphed into a sickening dread. Why was my husband having a secret dinner with the head of the enemy company? Before my brain could even begin to process the professional implications, the personal betrayal struck with the force of a speeding train. Julian leaned forward, his hands reaching out to cup Eleanor's face. He pulled her close, and right there, in the middle of the crowded restaurant, he kissed her. It was not a brief or polite greeting. It was a deep, passionate, and consuming embrace that communicated months, or perhaps even years, of intimate familiarity. He kissed her with a level of hunger and devotion that he had not shown me in a very long time. A blinding white-hot fury erupted within my chest. The carefully constructed illusion of my perfect marriage shattered into countless jagged pieces, cutting deep into my soul. The soft jazz music faded into a loud ringing in my ears. I grabbed my leather clutch, my fingers gripping the material so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white. I pushed my heavy chair back, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the floor. I stood up, my body shaking with a rage so intense it felt cold. I was going to march directly over to that VIP table. I was going to tear them apart, throw my drink in his lying face, and expose their disgusting affair to every wealthy patron in the room. I took exactly one aggressive step forward, my eyes fixed on my cheating husband, but before I could take a second step, a solid mass collided heavily with my right shoulder. The impact was incredibly forceful, instantly breaking my momentum and causing me to stumble backward. My purse slipped from my grasp and clattered loudly onto the polished floor. I snapped my head around, ready to yell at whoever had just hit me. An older man dressed in a sharp, charcoal gray suit was standing right next to me. Before I could utter a single syllable of anger, the man smoothly dropped to one knee, acting as though he was simply being a gentleman and retrieving my fallen bag. He did not look up at my face. Instead, leaning incredibly close to my legs, he spoke in a voice so low, calm, and chilling that it instantly froze the burning anger in my veins. If you take one more step toward that table, you will personally destroy the only survival advantage you have left in this game. I stood completely paralyzed. What game was he talking about? My heart began to pound against my ribs like a trapped bird. The man stood up gracefully, using his tall frame to completely block my line of sight toward Julian and Eleanor. He did not offer a polite apology for bumping into me. He did not introduce himself. Instead, he reached out, and his knuckles gently brushed against my trembling palm. I felt the cold, rigid edge of a plastic hotel room keycard being pressed firmly into my hand. Tucked directly underneath the card was a small, thickly folded piece of paper. "The password is on the paper," he murmured softly, his face remaining an unreadable mask of absolute indifference. Without waiting for a response, and without giving me a single second to process what had just happened, the mysterious man turned around. He blended effortlessly into the moving crowd of wealthy diners and waiters, disappearing through the heavy oak doors of the restaurant. I was left standing entirely alone in the shadows of the corner booth, my fingers tightly clutching the plastic card. I looked back toward the VIP table one last time. Julian was smiling at Eleanor, looking happier than I had ever seen him. I swallowed the agonizing lump in my throat, turned my back on my broken marriage, and walked out of the restaurant, clutching the keys to a mystery that was about to drag me into a terrifying abyss. The drive back to our luxury downtown apartment was a blur of neon streetlights and blinding headlights. I stepped into our quiet, dark living room and immediately collapsed onto the velvet sofa, my hands trembling as I stared at the plastic hotel keycard and the crumpled piece of paper. The password written on it was just a random string of letters, but it felt like a heavy anchor dragging me into the unknown. I sat in the dark for exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes, practicing my breathing, locking my shattered heart inside a mental vault. I had to survive tonight. When the front door finally clicked open at midnight, the hallway light flooded the room. Julian stepped inside, looking appropriately exhausted. His tie loosened around his neck. Hidden behind his back was a massive bouquet of crimson roses. "I am so sorry, Avery." He sighed heavily, his voice dripping with fabricated guilt. The propulsion failure was a nightmare. We barely managed to patch the core systems. Happy anniversary. My love. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. His lips felt like burning acid against my skin, carrying the faint, lingering scent of Eleanor's expensive vanilla perfume. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to scream, not to slap the roses out of his hands, and not to claw at his deceitful eyes. Instead, I forced the corners of my mouth to stretch into a sympathetic, loving smile. "It is okay, honey," I lied, my voice remarkably steady. "Work comes first. I know how important this project is to you." I took the flowers, placed them in a crystal vase, and played the role of the perfectly understanding wife until he finally fell asleep. I lay awake the entire night, listening to the rhythmic breathing of a stranger lying next to me in our marital bed. The second the sun rose, Julian rushed out the door for another supposedly critical meeting at Aeroforge Systems. The moment his car pulled out of the garage, I grabbed my coat and hailed a taxi to the address printed on the keycard. It was an unassuming, mid-range hotel located on the industrial edge of the city, miles away from our glamorous neighborhood. I walked down the poorly lit corridor on the 4th floor and stopped in front of room 412. I swiped the card. The light flashed green. I pushed the door open, my heart hammering wildly against my ribs. The room was completely transformed. The heavy blackout curtains were drawn shut, and the space was illuminated by the cold, blue glare of 6 large computer monitors arranged on a folding table. Sitting in the center of the technological chaos was the older man from the restaurant. He was drinking black coffee from a styrofoam cup. "You made the right choice by coming here, Avery," he said, not sounding surprised in the slightest. "My name is Marcus Thorne. Take a seat." I slowly walked over and sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed. "Who are you? What is this about?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound brave. "I am a private investigator," Marcus replied, pulling up a new folder on his main screen. "I was not hired to follow your husband. I was hired by Arthur Vance, the legal husband of Eleanor Vance. He suspects her of infidelity and intends to file for a highly contested, multi-million-dollar divorce. My job was simply to capture proof of her affairs so Arthur could secure 90% of their shared assets in the settlement." Marcus clicked his mouse, and a series of high-resolution photographs filled the screens. There were dozens of images showing Julian and Eleanor at various private locations, entering a secluded cabin, sitting in parked cars, and sharing intimate moments. The visual confirmation of their physical relationship felt like a knife twisting in my gut. But Marcus did not stop there. If it were just a standard case of cheating, I would have handed these over to my client and walked away. Marcus continued, his tone turning deadly serious. "But your husband is ambitious, and his ambition has crossed a very dangerous line." He brought up a new sequence of photographs. These pictures were taken in dimly lit underground parking garages and abandoned city parks. In these images, they were not kissing. Instead, Julian was nervously looking over his shoulder while handing Eleanor small, metallic objects. "Are those flash drives?" I asked, leaning closer to the screens, a cold sweat breaking out on my neck. "Military-grade encrypted hard drives," Marcus corrected me. "Julian is not just sleeping with the enemy, he is systematically stealing the highly classified architectural blueprints for Aeroforge Systems' next-generation unmanned aerial drone engine. He is smuggling proprietary corporate secrets out of his lab and handing them directly to the chief executive officer of Vance Innovations." The air in the hotel room suddenly felt non-existent. I gasped, pressing my hands over my mouth. The gravity of the situation hit me with crushing force. This was not a simple domestic dispute. This was high-level corporate espionage. It was a severe federal crime. "Julian is using his senior security clearance to bypass the internal firewalls," Marcus explained, pointing to a zoomed-in timestamp showing 2 o'clock in the morning. "Aeroforge holds contracts with the Department of Defense when they discover this data breach, and they absolutely will. The federal authorities will tear his life apart." A terrifying realization washed over me, turning my blood to ice. "We share all our bank accounts. I whispered, panic rising in my throat. My name is on the lease for our apartment, the loan for his car, and our joint tax returns. If they investigate his finances, they will investigate mine. Exactly, Marcus nodded grimly. When the feds raid your home, they will not care that you were a devoted, clueless wife. They will look at the sudden influx of unexplained wealth. They will see your signature on the joint asset documents, and they will indict you as an accomplice to treason and corporate theft. You could easily face 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The betrayal had mutated into a lethal trap. Julian was not just breaking my heart. He was actively destroying my entire future, setting me up to take the fall for his greedy, treasonous crimes. I sat in the blue light of the monitors, the silence of the hotel room deafening, as the naive, loving wife inside me completely died, replaced by a desperate, terrified woman who suddenly realized she was fighting for her literal survival. The days that followed blurred into a suffocating psychological prison. I was forced to construct an impenetrable facade, living a highly dangerous double life right under the same roof as the man who was actively planning my destruction. By day, I sat in my brightly lit, modern office at Lumina Aura, a prestigious software firm where I worked as a senior user interface designer. I spent 8 long hours a day meticulously adjusting color palettes, refining typography, and optimizing complex navigation menus for high-end mobile applications. I smiled at my coworkers, drank terrible office coffee, and pretended my reality had not been entirely upended. But the exact moment the sun dipped below the Denver skyline and I returned to our luxury apartment, my true, grueling work began. I became a silent ghost in my own home. I would wait patiently in the dark, my heart hammering in my ears, listening to the steady rhythm of Julian breathing in his sleep. Only then would I carefully slide out from under the heavy down comforter, creeping barefoot into his home office to silently extract data from his unsecured secondary devices. It was during one of these terrifying midnight data extractions that I stumbled upon the true, horrifying scale of his greed. Bypassing the basic numeric security pin on his secondary tablet, I gained access to a hidden financial application that was cleverly masked to look like a simple daily weather widget. Inside was a complex routing number connected directly to an offshore bank account located in the Cayman Islands. The account was technically registered under an obscure shell corporation, but the primary authorized beneficiary was undeniably Julian. I stared at the glowing screen, my blood running completely cold. The available balance displayed in bold font was staggering. It read exactly $4,750,000. This was not just some minor corporate side hustle. He was building an illicit empire funded by stolen corporate secrets, carefully preparing a golden parachute for himself while leaving me perfectly positioned to drown in the incoming federal crossfire. Perhaps sensing a slight, unintended shift in my daily demeanor, or perhaps just acting out of a guilty conscience, Julian suddenly transformed into the perfect, incredibly attentive husband. The very next evening, he walked through the front door carrying a thick manila envelope filled with glossy, high-resolution travel brochures. He wrapped his arms tightly around my waist from behind, kissing my neck with a fake, manufactured tenderness that made my skin physically crawl. "I know I have been working way too hard lately and neglecting you," he whispered softly, resting his chin on my shoulder. "So, I booked us a 2-week luxury vacation to a private island resort in the Maldives, a second honeymoon, just for us. We leave in exactly 1 month. What do you think, honey?" It was a brilliant, calculated distraction. A shiny object dangled right in front of my face to keep me entirely blind to the fact that he was systematically dismantling our shared life. I forced a bright, artificially thrilled smile, throwing my arms around his neck and thanking him profusely for his incredible generosity, all while mentally calculating exactly how quickly I could drain our joint checking accounts before he noticed. The absolute true test of my remaining sanity arrived exactly 3 days later. We hosted a formal, catered dinner party for several high-ranking executives and senior engineers from Aeroforge Systems. I spend hours preparing a lavish five-course meal, flawlessly playing the role of the devoted, supportive corporate wife. The dining room was filled with the clinking of expensive crystal and the loud, boisterous laughter of wealthy, powerful men. I sat quietly at the end of the long mahogany table, gracefully pouring a very expensive vintage red wine, when Julian stood up to propose a toast to the room. He confidently raised his glass, his handsome face glowing with what looked like absolute sincerity. "I want to take a moment to raise a glass to the incredible engineering team sitting here tonight," Julian declared, his voice carrying the smooth, charismatic tone of a born leader. In our highly competitive industry, intellectual property is absolutely everything. But what truly drives our continued success is not just the technology we build, it is loyalty. It is the unwavering trust we have in one another, to integrity, and to the Aeroforge family. "To integrity," the distinguished guests echoed in unison, enthusiastically raising their glasses toward the ceiling. I gripped the fragile stem of my wine glass so tightly I was genuinely surprised the delicate crystal did not shatter directly into my palm. I smiled warmly and took a slow sip, swallowing the bitter, metallic taste of utter disgust. The hypocrisy radiating from him was so thick it was physically choking me. He was standing right there in our home, preaching loudly about loyalty to the very men he was actively betraying, while simultaneously planning to leave his loyal wife behind to take the ultimate fall for his treason. The sheer audacity of his self-righteous speech pushed me completely over the edge. That night, after the final guest had departed and Julian had passed out in the bedroom from drinking entirely too much wine, I took the ultimate, undeniable risk. I sneaked back into his dark office and tackled his primary, heavily encrypted work laptop, using a hidden backdoor entry code I had observed him typing over his shoulder earlier that week. I broke directly into his secure, private mail server. I dug furiously through his hidden files and found something far worse and far more sinister than the offshore bank accounts. It was a drafted email, scheduled to be sent anonymously to the internal corporate security division of Aeroforge Systems. Attached to the draft were heavily manipulated system logs and forged internal access requests. I read the text of the email over and over, my heart stopping dead in my chest. Julian was methodically framing a 22-year-old junior intern named Liam for the entire data theft operation. Liam was a bright, incredibly eager college student who idolized Julian as a professional mentor. My husband had deliberately routed the stolen drone files through the intern's unsecured, low-level workstation, creating a perfect, undeniable paper trail that pointed directly away from himself and straight toward the innocent kid. Julian was not just a cheating husband or a clever corporate thief. He was a cold-blooded, entirely remorseless sociopath. He was perfectly willing to destroy the life and future of an innocent young man, bankrupt his own wife, and tear down two massive technology corporations just to secure his own massive wealth and personal freedom. Sitting alone in the pale blue glow of the computer monitor, any lingering trace of love, doubt, or hesitation completely evaporated from my soul. The terrified, heartbroken wife ceased to exist. In her place, a lethal, deeply calculating version of myself was born. Julian thought he was the smartest player in the whole room, manipulating everyone around him like mindless pawns on a chessboard, but he had fundamentally underestimated the quiet, observant woman he had married. I was no longer trying to just survive his cruel game. I was going to rewrite the rules entirely, and I was going to burn his entire world to the ground. The burner phone I had purchased specifically for this nightmare vibrated aggressively against the cold marble countertop of my kitchen island. It was exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a rainy Tuesday. I answered immediately. "Avery, you need to listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, his usually calm and collected voice sounding strained and breathless. "The entire operation is completely dead. You need to pack a bag and get out of the city right now." My grip tightened around the cheap plastic phone. "What are you talking about? We have all the evidence we need. Arthur Vance just called me." Marcus interrupted rapidly. "He is dropping the divorce proceedings entirely. He just received an anonymous, untraceable wire transfer for $15 million. It is a massive hush money payment designed to buy his total silence. He ordered me to destroy every single photograph, every digital file, and every shred of evidence I collected. He was terrified. Avery. He told me that the fixers from Vance Innovations paid him a visit. These are not just corporate lawyers. They are incredibly dangerous people who make loud problems disappear very quietly. I stood perfectly still, listening to the heavy rain lashing against my living room windows. They know someone was watching, Marcus continued, panic bleeding into his tone. Vance Innovations is a multi-billion-dollar entity with unlimited resources. If they find out you are digging into their chief executive officer, they will crush you effortlessly. I am wiping my servers clean and leaving Denver for a few months. Drop this crusade. Avery, take whatever cash you have and run before they realize who you are. I am not running, Marcus, I replied, my voice chillingly steady. I cannot run from my own name being tied to his financial crimes. I am finishing this. You are going to get yourself killed, he warned one last time before the line went completely dead. I tossed the burner phone into the trash can. I did not have time to panic. I marched straight into Julian's home office and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I had one final, deeply encrypted master folder left to crack on his private server. It was hidden behind 3 layers of biometric security and complex firewall protocols that had taken me over a week to slowly bypass. I sat down at his sleek leather desk chair, booted up my own customized decryption software, and initiated an aggressive brute force attack on the final security barrier. The digital timer on my screen estimated a wait of 45 minutes. I sat there agonizing over every passing second, staring unblinkingly at the monitor as lines of complex code cascaded down the screen. Finally, a bright green box flashed, signaling a successful breach. The firewall collapsed, granting me full and unrestricted access to the deepest, darkest corner of my husband's digital life. I fully expected to find more stolen aerospace blueprints or perhaps disgusting love letters exchanged between him and Eleanor. Instead, I opened the first document and felt the entire room aggressively tilt on its axis. It was a highly confidential financial audit from Vance Innovations, dated 3 years ago. I clicked through the next several files, my mind racing to comprehend what I was seeing. There were scanned copies of offshore tax evasion schemes, doctored revenue reports, and undeniable proof of massive corporate embezzlement. Every single illegal transaction bore the direct, authorized electronic signature of Eleanor Vance. The biggest, most earth-shattering twist slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Julian was not Eleanor's puppet. He was not a weak, ambitious man being manipulated by a powerful female executive. He was the puppet master. I opened a subfolder titled Leverage and found dozens of recorded phone calls and aggressive email chains between my husband and Eleanor. I played the first audio file. Julian's voice filled the room. Stripped of all its usual charming warmth, it was cold, commanding, and utterly ruthless. He was explicitly detailing her financial crimes, threatening to hand the entire dossier over to the Federal Securities Exchange Commission unless she complied with his demands. He was deliberately forcing Eleanor to purchase the stolen drone engine designs from him at an astronomical premium, using her own dirty secrets to trap her in a corner. He was blackmailing the head of a massive technology empire. The pieces of the horrifying puzzle finally snapped together, forming a picture so dark and calculated it took my breath away. But the final revelation was still waiting for me at the bottom of the directory. It was a folder labeled simply with the word exit. I double-clicked the icon, my hands shaking violently. Inside was a scanned copy of a brand new passport featuring Julian's face but a completely different legal name. Next to it was a confirmed one-way first-class boarding pass to a non-extradition country in South America, scheduled to depart in exactly 5 days. But it was the financial documents that truly broke my mind. Julian had recently taken out massive, high-interest loans against our shared luxury apartment and my personal retirement accounts. He had leveraged every single piece of property we jointly owned, siphoning the maximum amount of cash and funneling it straight into his untraceable offshore accounts. His true ultimate plan was staring me right in the face. He was going to collect the massive payout from Eleanor, instantly transfer the funds, and vanish completely. He had carefully orchestrated everything so that when the federal authorities and the corporate security teams finally descended on the wreckage, they would find Eleanor guilty of massive corporate espionage, and they would find me, the oblivious wife, holding the bag for nearly $2 million in fraudulent joint debt. He was going to let me drown in a federal prison while he lived like a king on a tropical beach. A strange, unnatural calm washed over my entire body. The lingering sadness and the sharp sting of marital betrayal were instantly replaced by something infinitely more dangerous, a pure, unadulterated need for total annihilation. I slowly closed the laptop, staring at my dark reflection in the glossy screen. Julian had spent months meticulously building an incredibly complex trap for me. Now, I was going to use his own brilliant engineering against him, and I was going to lock the cage from the outside. I stood up from his desk and walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering Denver skyline. The rain was washing the city streets clean, and I felt a similar, terrifying clarity wash over my mind. He thought I was nothing more than collateral damage, a naive little wife who would simply sit back and let him destroy her life, but he had fundamentally forgotten who he married. I was a senior systems designer. My entire career was built on finding critical flaws in complex structures and tearing them down to build something better. Julian had built a masterpiece of deception, but he had left his digital fingerprints all over the crime scene. I was no longer interested in just saving myself from his financial ruin. I wanted to see him lose absolutely everything he had ever cared about. 3 days later, the financial news networks were completely dominated by a massive breaking announcement from Vance Innovations. They were hosting a highly anticipated, nationally televised press conference at the Grand Metropolitan Convention Center to unveil a revolutionary leap in aerospace propulsion technology. I watched the sleek commercial playing on our living room television, my expression completely frozen. It was the stolen drone engine. Eleanor was actually going through with it, backed into a corner by my husband's ruthless blackmail. That same evening, Julian walked into the bedroom pulling his expensive leather carry-on suitcase. He wore a perfectly tailored dark blue suit and an expression of manufactured regret. "I am so sorry, my love," he murmured, pulling me into a tight, warm embrace that made my skin crawl with absolute revulsion. "The corporate office is sending me to Seattle for an emergency summit. I will be gone for 4 days. I promise to make it up to you the second I get back. We still have the Maldives to look forward to." He kissed my cheek, lingering just long enough to sell the illusion of a devoted husband. I smiled softly, reaching up to adjust his expensive silk tie. "Have a safe flight, honey," I replied smoothly, my voice devoid of any tremor. "Do not worry about me. I will be right here waiting for you." The moment the heavy front door clicked shut and the electronic deadbolt engaged, the loving wife persona was instantly and permanently discarded. I walked straight into his office, pulled up his heavy leather chair, and cracked my knuckles. It was time to build the guillotine. Julian was a brilliant aerospace engineer, but his supreme arrogance had made him incredibly sloppy with basic network security. To facilitate his massive data theft from the comfort of his own home, he had created a custom, hidden bridge between our local wireless router and his encrypted servers. He assumed nobody would ever be smart enough to look for it. He completely forgot that I designed complex user interfaces and deeply understood network architecture for a living. Using that exact vulnerability, I mapped the digital route he had established with Eleanor's executive team. From there, it took me exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes to piggyback onto the dedicated servers of the Metropolitan Convention Center. They were using a standard, high-end audio-visual presentation system for the upcoming press conference. I slipped past their rudimentary event firewalls, buried a customized executable script directly into the master projection control folder, and silently locked the administrative access from the inside. When the time came, Neither Eleanor nor her highly paid technical staff would be able to stop the presentation I had meticulously prepared. But a digital ambush was simply not enough. I needed physical, undeniable destruction. I spent the next 4 hours compiling every single piece of evidence I had harvested over the past few weeks: the offshore bank account routing numbers, the Cayman Islands balances, the threatening audio recordings between Julian and Eleanor, and the original stolen drone schematics bearing the Aeroforge watermarks. I loaded everything onto 20 highly encrypted flash drives. I placed each drive into a thick, unmarked black envelope. Alongside the drives, I included a printed, glossy front row VIP ticket to the Vance Innovations press conference. I drove across town in the middle of the night, utilizing anonymous overnight courier drop boxes. 10 envelopes were dispatched directly to the personal home addresses of the entire Aeroforge Systems Board of Directors. The remaining 10 envelopes were sent via priority delivery to the regional headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically addressed to the Division of Corporate Fraud and Economic Espionage. I wanted the room packed with the exact people who had the absolute power to tear Julian and Eleanor to shreds. Returning to the apartment as the sun began to rise, the sky painted in bruised shades of purple and gray, I initiated the final phase of my quiet departure. I logged into our banking portal. Julian had already drained the majority of our shared equity, but he had left exactly $25,000 in our primary checking account to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I initiated an immediate wire transfer, moving every single remaining cent into an untraceable, secure account under my maiden name. Let him try to buy a cup of expensive coffee at the airport when his entire world collapsed. I methodically packed a single rolling suitcase with my most essential clothing and important personal documents. I left his expensive gifts, the designer dresses, and the hollow memories right where they belonged, standing in the pristine, silent kitchen. I slipped the heavy diamond wedding band off my left hand. The metal felt cold and utterly meaningless. I placed it deliberately in the exact center of the dark granite island countertop. It was the only goodbye he was ever going to receive. I pulled my car out of the residential parking garage for the very last time and drove straight toward the downtown district. The convention center was a massive, imposing structure of glass and steel, already swarming with eager journalists, bright television camera crews, and wealthy industry executives. Using a forged vendor pass I had printed at my office days ago, I bypassed the heavy front security checkpoints with absolute ease. I navigated through the labyrinth of back hallways and service elevators until I reached my intended destination, a secluded, darkened viewing balcony on the second floor, positioned directly above the main auditorium. I stepped into the shadows, leaning my forearms against the cool metal railing. Below me, the massive stage was bathed in brilliant blue and white spotlights. The room was filling up rapidly with thousands of attendees. I scanned the front rows and felt a dark, triumphant smile curve my lips as I spotted the grim, unsmiling faces of federal agents and Aeroforge executives taking their designated seats. The trap was perfectly set. The predators were officially in the room. I crossed my arms, waiting in the comforting darkness to watch the brilliant, untouchable architect of my misery walk blindly into his own execution. The heavy velvet curtains surrounding my hidden balcony smelled faintly of dust and old fabric. I stood perfectly still in the suffocating darkness, looking down at the massive convention center auditorium. The energy in the room below was absolutely electric. Thousands of wealthy investors, eager technology journalists, and senior corporate executives murmured in hushed, excited voices. The overhead light suddenly dimmed to a dramatic, moody blue, signaling the start of the event. A booming announcer voice echoed through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers, introducing the visionary leader of Vance Innovations. Eleanor Vance strode onto the brightly lit stage with the absolute confidence of a conquering queen. She wore a striking, tailored white suit that stood out sharply against the dark background. The audience erupted into deafening applause. My eyes, however, immediately darted away from the stage and locked onto the very first row of VIP seating. There he was, Julian, the man who had kissed me goodbye just a few hours ago, claiming he was boarding a flight to Seattle. He was sitting directly in the center of the front row, wearing a smug, triumphant smirk that made my blood run completely cold. He looked like a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted the entire world. He was waiting to collect his massive ransom and disappear forever. Eleanor raised her hands, gesturing for the massive crowd to quiet down. She approached the sleek acrylic podium and leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth and dripping with fabricated passion. "Tonight, we are not just unveiling a new product, we are completely redefining the future boundaries of unmanned aerospace flight. We are introducing a propulsion system so advanced, it leaves our competitors decades behind." Julian clapped enthusiastically from the front row, playing the role of the impressed rival engineer to absolute perfection. Eleanor smiled warmly down at the audience, radiating pure arrogance. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, wireless presentation remote. "Behold, the future," Eleanor declared boldly, pressing her thumb down on the remote to transition to the highly anticipated product introduction slide. The gigantic, 50-foot digital screen positioned directly behind her instantly flashed a brilliant, blinding white, but the sleek, computer-generated model of the stolen drone engine never appeared. Instead, the high-definition screen glitched violently. A harsh, ear-piercing blast of digital static ripped through the auditorium speakers, causing thousands of attendees to wince and cover their ears. The screen flickered black for exactly 3 seconds before my custom executable script completely hijacked the mainframe. The brilliant white background was violently replaced by stark, undeniable truth. Gigantic, high-resolution images of Julian's hidden offshore bank statements materialized on the screen, detailing transfers of millions of dollars to the Cayman Islands. Before the audience could even process the massive numbers, the screen split into multiple windows. The devastating blackmail emails Julian had sent to Eleanor were displayed in massive font. Every single threat, every explicit demand for ransom money, and every detailed description of her own corporate embezzlement was projected for the entire world to read. To seal their absolute destruction, the audio system crackled to life. Julian's cold, ruthless voice echoed through the cavernous hall, playing the exact recording I had extracted from his encrypted server. "You will wire the funds by Friday, Eleanor, or I hand these audit reports straight to the federal authorities. You buy the engine designs, or you go to prison. It is that simple." Total, absolute pandemonium erupted inside the auditorium. The stunned silence shattered into a million pieces. Journalists began screaming questions, their camera flashes firing in a blinding, chaotic strobe effect. Eleanor stumbled backward away from the podium, her face drained of all color, staring up at the screen in pure, unadulterated horror. Down in the VIP section, the trap snapped completely shut. The grim-faced men in the dark suits whom I had spotted earlier moved with terrifying synchronized speed. Over a dozen federal agents and senior members of the Aeroforge Board of Directors vaulted over the velvet ropes, charging directly toward the stage. Julian scrambled out of his chair, his smug confidence evaporating into absolute terror. He looked wildly around the room, desperately searching for an exit route through the panicked, surging crowd. He shoved a wealthy investor out of his way and bolted toward the side emergency exit aisle. He did not make it far. 2 massive event security guards intercepted him, grabbing his arms. But it was the man standing directly behind the guards that made my heart soar. Marcus Thorne had returned. The older private investigator stepped forward, his expression completely unreadable, and firmly placed his hand flat against Julian's chest, physically blocking his only path to freedom. Marcus had decided to stay in Denver just long enough to ensure the monster was caged. Julian struggled violently against the security guards, screaming for them to let him go. The federal agents quickly swarmed him, forcefully pulling his hands behind his back. In that terrifying, chaotic moment of total defeat, Julian stopped fighting. He froze, his chest heaving, and slowly tilted his head upward, scanning the dark perimeter of the massive room. His desperate eyes traveled up the high walls and finally stopped dead on the second-floor balcony. I stepped slightly forward out of the heavy shadows, allowing a single pale beam of light to illuminate my face. I stood tall, my hands resting calmly on the cold metal railing. Julian stared at me, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. The color completely drained from his face as his entire meticulously constructed world crashed down upon him. He finally understood that the naive, easily manipulated wife he had planned to destroy was the exact architect of his absolute ruin. I did not scream. I did not gloat. I simply looked down at the pathetic, ruined man who had broken my heart, and I gave him a slow, chilling half-smile of pure, absolute satisfaction. Without waiting to watch them place the heavy iron handcuffs on his wrists, I turned my back on the balcony. I walked out of the viewing room, down the quiet, carpeted back hallway, and pushed open the heavy glass exit doors. The cool, crisp night air of Denver washed over me, smelling like fresh rain and endless possibilities. The heavy, suffocating weight that had crushed my chest for weeks was completely gone. I stepped out onto the damp pavement, walking confidently into the bright city lights. I was no longer a victim. I was a completely free woman, starting a brand new chapter of my life, knowing with absolute certainty that I would never be fooled by anyone ever again. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.